Welcome to the Student Ministry Matters podcast. We want to encourage, equip, and connect those with a passion to impact the next generation for Jesus Christ. Student ministry can be a lonely place. You might even feel like you're the only one in your church or community that cares about students. Well, know this, you're not alone. People all across the country are engaging Gen Z and care deeply about the spiritual direction of these young men and women. Whether you're full-time, part-time, bivocational, or volunteer, if you have a heart for students, this is the place for you.
Welcome to another edition of Student Ministry Matters. My name's Dan Carson, and I'm your host. And with me today, I've got Chris Vine. Say hey, Chris.
Hey, Chris. Hey, guys. Good to see you.
Well, today it's a little loud on Chris's end, but that's okay. He's off at camp speaking at the Ozarks Baptist Encampment that is in Siloam Springs. We're happy that he's able to make some time and be here with us today as we record. Chris, is this your second or third camp that you're speaking at?
This is my fourth camp that I'm speaking at this summer. So, yeah, it's been a busy summer for us.
That is busy, man. Those things, you're there for a week, so you have to do all this ministry work by computer, find coffee shops, and all of that sort of thing, right?
Yeah, which I like coffee shops, so I'm kind of living my best life right now.
That's awesome. Well, on today's podcast, we are virtually sitting down with Aaron Williams, who recently spoke at the 2021 SOAR conference and talking about students and worship. Now, I've seen Aaron doing his thing for Jesus for many years. He started out as a worship leader at the SOAR conference more than a couple of years ago. We talked about it before we started recording, and he's grown in his skills and understanding of worship. He led a group called Solace Found that I had in my church in Rogers, Arkansas, and then was a part of a group called We the Union. My son has used Never Ending Love as a part of his worship leading set for many years now. But Aaron's a worship leader, songwriter, visionary, and co-founder of Dwell. He's a passionate guy about leading people with creative and thoughtful vision for the future. Aaron and his wife Mallory have two sons, Michael West and Beckham, and I think they're about on the verge to move to the Dallas Metroplex. Aaron, it's great to have you on the podcast with us.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. Good to be with you guys.
Well, why don't you take a moment and tell us a little bit about what Dwell is and what's happening in your ministry right now?
Yeah, absolutely. I would love to. In short, Dwell is it's a movement that's also resourcing. It's becoming a resourcing outlet for local churches and pastors and leaders. It started in our local church here in Little Rock, which is where I'm currently living. Yeah, our church is Fellowship Bible Church, and we started. Dwell was just a conference that we were doing. It was basically for anyone in the church who was just hungry for a weekend to set aside and come and seek God together, time in scriptures, time in worship, and with a unique kind of aspect of spiritual disciplines or practices, if you will. And that conference just kind of snowballed in a really cool way. Like people really connected with what was happening there. And, looking back, I just think God was doing something unique amongst his people with the conference. And so through lots of conversation and prayer, we decided to launch it out, sensing that maybe God wanted to encourage the broader kingdom and other people with the ministry. And that's where the resourcing side came in, is we didn't want to just be an annual event, but we actually wanted to put some of the ideas and thoughts that we'd been working on into Bible studies and curriculum and songs and things like that. So that's what we've been doing for about the last year, almost a year and a half, and it's going really well. We're excited about it. You can check us out if you're on Instagram at Dwell with God, or the same if you just want to look online at dwellwithgod.com. You can see all that we're up to. So we're just trying to help leaders, and that's not just staff people, but literally anyone in the local church who's hungry to help lead other people towards seeking Jesus in renewing ways. Like we want to put resources in their hand. We want to be an encouraging voice to all those people. So that's kind of what we're trying to be up to.
Very cool. Well, what's happening now in your ministry, though? Not Dwell. You've got another piece that's going on.
Yeah, well, you mentioned we're moving to Dallas. So a part of Dwell, and really a part of my life for a long time, has been songwriting, particularly writing worship songs, like you mentioned. And it's something I've always been passionate about, something I've always loved to do. And just in these last few years, it seems like God has just opened some doors for me to do that on a little bit broader level and with more people. And so there's a company called the Worship Initiative. It's owned and kind of headed up by Shane and Shane, which I'm sure probably most of you guys may have heard of Shane and Shane, but if you haven't, they've been around for a number of years, a really faithful witness in worship music. And, they're just amazing guys and incredibly talented artists. And so the Worship Initiative is a resourcing site specifically for local church worship leaders. And it's kind of like a subscription model. You pay a certain monthly fee and you get not only the songs, but literally a ton of great resources to help local worship leaders and their ministries and their volunteers. And so they approached me and asked me if I'd be willing to come on with them as an artist. So basically what that looks like is I'm coming on to write songs, to record songs, and to do a personal worship project sometime in the next year and a half. And so I don't want to say it's a downside because we're excited about it, but the only major shift for us is we have to move to Dallas. And so it's probably better to say we get to move to Dallas, but it's a bittersweet thing for us. We've been since we graduated school. Mallory and our whole married life's been here. Our 2 sons were born here. So we're excited about Dallas. We're excited about the opportunity. We're just going through some of those saying goodbye and packing up the house and all of that. So we're kind of right in the middle of the transitional period. And so I'll be able to do Dwell from Dallas and work with those guys there. And so we're all on that big journey of faith, following where God leads and having to take steps of trust and obedience along the way. And so ask me in a couple years how it's gone. I'm optimistic and very hopeful, but, carrying a certain amount of just nerves about the whole thing as well. So,
well, how old are your boys?
7 and 5. So yeah, it's a big deal for them. The 5-year-old starting kindergarten in Dallas in a couple weeks. Yeah.
Well, ministry, of course, is important. It's Student Ministry Matters. That's even the name of our podcast.
Yep.
But so is fun. What do you and your family do for fun there in the Little Rock area?
Well, with our boys being 5 and 7, everything's active, So we are doing, right now in summertime, thankfully we have a swimming pool in our neighborhood. So both of our boys are on swim team. So they're loving that. So we spend a lot of time at the pool, either our pool or, at swim meets, that type thing. Or when it's not too hot, they're both really into bike riding, skateboarding. There's a lot of hiking, really good hiking around Little Rock here. And so when it's not summertime and scorching hot, we do a lot of getting out and hiking and enjoying the outdoors. So they're kind of in that phase where they're trying everything out. They don't have their favorite sport. They have their, the ones they like more or less, but they're trying all the sports out. They're trying all the, the bikes and scooters and skateboards and trying to figure out what they really click with. So it's a lot of fun. It's tiring some days, but it's a ton of fun.
It is fun. I remember back when my son was about that age, he would want to try a little bit of everything. He had the skateboard phase that he went through, but we landed in martial arts. It was one of those things that was just a great fit for him, and he stuck with it for from 7 until 13 or 14, and it's still kind of a part of your life. When you get it, it's ingrained in you, and so just a whole lot of fun. Well, Chris, your boys are about that same age, aren't they?
Yeah, we're pretty close. I have an 8-year-old and a 5-year-old.
Okay, very cool. Hey, well, Aaron, I know that you have a long history with SOAR, the SOAR conference. Tell us a little bit about that. What church were you with when you first went to SOAR? Who was your youth pastor during that time, and how'd you end up leading worship?
I grew up in Camden, Arkansas, which is, a small town. It's actually, I guess, one of the larger of the small towns in South Arkansas.
Right.
I went to Emmanuel Baptist Church, which was a pretty small church, but looking back, there was so many amazing people at that church. And I just look back and I'm like, wow, can't believe all these families that were just such great people that God put in my life.
Mm.
TJ Johnson and his wife Jenny were my youth pastors. They were my youth pastors during the formative years that I was really engaged in youth group. So they were amazing. They just did such an amazing job of just inviting the kids to their house. I mean, they just kind of had a life on life model of ministry. And so somehow they talked me into going to SOAR. I think it was my 7th or 8th grade year. I was not that interested in it. But I went because my parents wanted me to go, and we had this new cool youth pastor, and God really moved in my life over at the conference specifically. I mean, there's a lot of things I could attest it to, but I remember distinctly him moving in my life at the event that would just trigger kind of a ripple effect of other things that he would do in my life in years later, and started leading worship in the youth group. I wouldn't have even called it that at that point. I would have just said, TJ asked me to play guitar and help sing some songs. I didn't have a reference for leading worship at that point, which is so interesting how God, it's kind of a side note, but how God uses us even when that's the case. And I just fell in love with it. My dad's side of the family was very musical, and so I just started loving having that outlet to be a part of with music. And one thing led to another, and we formed a band out of our youth group and started traveling and leading worship. And eventually the leaders of SOAR called me and asked me, hey, would you want to be a part of helping, lead as a student? And one thing turned into another, and I ended up kind of leading at the event for over a decade for sure. I don't know exactly how many years it was. I think it was maybe 12 or 13 years total. And so, SOAR feels like family to me. When I think, when anyone mentions SOAR conference, I think of those are my people. Like, even though it's different kids move in and out of youth groups every few years, stuff like that, I just always think of that's my heritage. Those are my people that really shaped me, and an event that shaped me. And gosh, I mean, it shaped a lot of people before me, because the conference has been going on for quite a while now. And I just love that history, and thankful to have been a small part of it.
Yeah, it is. It's, of course, been around since 1991, been through a lot of different phases and looks. But what I've loved is hearing your story. You were a guy who is really in small town Arkansas, that God used this conference to kind of speak to your heart about something that you might not have considered before. And it was just really cool. And I've seen the same thing in my own family with my son, and just how God has used that over the years to speak to different people. Well, this past year, you had the opportunity, or I say past year, to the 2021, we're still in that year right now as we record. You had the opportunity to speak to our students, and you took a couple of sessions, kind of hit on that big topic of worship. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, it was a huge honor to come and speak. It's a topic that I'm super passionate about, so I was grateful to be considered for that. And teaching on worship is one of those things for me. I think it's easy and difficult all at the same time, because I almost have too many things to say that I can't get my thoughts ordered enough, because I'm just so passionate about the topic and about how effective worship ministry can be in the life of students and stuff like that. Yeah, it was a huge honor. I mean, and really, I just kind of tried to come at it from thinking about where I was at when I was in their shoes, which was for me, no, I didn't really have a framework at all of what worship was biblically. I just had a framework of what I saw when I went to my church on Sunday morning, or I went to my youth group on Wednesday night. And it's not that was bad. It was just, I didn't really have an understanding that God had created me to respond to him in certain ways, and that he had, I guess the simple way to say it is he created all of us to be worshipers. And I remember that thought being so revolutionary for me personally, and changing the way I viewed myself and the way I viewed worship, where it's more of the question became less of, do I worship? And more of no, I do worship. What am I worshiping? What am I directing that worship toward? And that actually helped me see some of the, what I would now call idols that were in my young heart, where it was oh, I was worshiping that position on that, sports team, or I was worshiping people thinking about me in this certain way, like my perception of who I was. And it really helped me get down to the hard issue of like, God wired us so that he could be the ultimate end of who we are and where we're directing our love and our affection and our energy and our desires. That's kind of where I came at with session one. I just wanted to kind of set up that framework, because I think we often so quickly go to physical expression in worship. What does worship look like? And I remember Chris and I had a conversation about this leading into the conference, and I was like, oh man, like I love that topic and I would really love to get to that topic. But I feel like for students, if we just go there, we're actually missing like the central point, because we all know that you can fake certain physical expressions. We all know that God can be doing a deep work in your heart, and it doesn't always manifest in an exact physical way. And so it just feels like we're talking more about the surface level instead of diving deep. So that was what I was trying to do, at least. It seemed like I had a number of conversations with students afterward where it seemed like, that framing it that way was helpful for them. I certainly hope it was,
Aaron, I think it was very, very helpful. Of course, most people who were at SOAR, I thought they really experienced the impact of us going a little bit deeper, of you going deeper in the direction that you did. And I'm so thankful for that. And, personally speaking, I don't want to get too personal here, but for me, and I think for many others, I think I can speak for many others at SOAR who have in many ways been going to SOAR for years and seeing you lead like you've just described. But then also this year was not to say that you'll never come back, because we certainly hope that you will, but it was kind of a capstone event. And I don't know if it felt that way for you, but it was just really cool to see you who have led worship for so many years now be able to come and teach the scriptures on what it means to truly worship, and to go so much deeper than just like you said, the surface level of what it might look like. But the fact that we are all worshipers, that God has created us this way. Kind of a similar question, and maybe one just to not elaborate on too much, but you go with it as you like. Was it a capstone event for you? I mean, was it? Did it feel that way? Because there were some really cool moments, I know, for me personally, just to see you be able to speak and to hear God use you the way that he did this year.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I think, if whether it's a capstone, not knowing what the future ever holds, I think it was definitely a full circle event, where it's
that's good.
Sometimes God just he does things in our lives that allow us to see his work. Maybe it's almost like if you could hit, like when you have a map on your computer and you can hit the zoom out button, it's almost like every once in a while God does those things that allows you to zoom out. And being at conference this year and speaking, it was a little bit me just like being able to see the work of God in my life, because I know how far from him, or just maybe how disinterested I was. Like, I just know where I was as a kid, and my heart was not seeking to glorify Jesus. And so to see his work in my life, to bring me along, to put people in a church family and youth pastors. I mean, I could literally name 100 people that he put in my life, that he, just grew me little bit by little bit by little bit. And then the grace of being able to lead songs, which, in some ways is a form of teaching. It's just a different vehicle of teaching, I think.
Yeah.
But then to come back and speak, I just felt like it was such a cool moment to just look back and say, man, isn't God just so gracious? Isn't he so just good to us? I don't deserve to be in that kind of position, and without him, I certainly wouldn't be. So it was that's kind of what I felt on the inside, just like a ton of gratitude. I loved that it was, a conference that impacted me so personally. So very cool, man.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, hey, I have a question that kind of shifts us a little bit, and you just alluded to it a little bit. So I don't want to make a make it too difficult for you. But if you can think about your teenage years, like you've already been reflecting on, who would you say, you mentioned TJ and Jenny, who would you say were some very influential people in your life? And maybe, again, if you could list 3, maybe 4 or 5, I don't know. You don't have to say their names if you don't want to. But I think for youth pastors who are listening to this, I think it's good for us to be reminded that that it takes a tribe, so to speak, to make disciples, And so who would you say are influential in your life during those years?
Yeah, well, for sure. I mean, TJ and Jenny were my youth pastors. They were the first people, when I look back on it, they were, I think, 19 and 20 years old, or maybe 20 and 21. Like, they were really young.
Yeah.
When you're a 7th or 8th grader, I don't remember how old I was exactly, but, that feels old. But you're looking back at it now, and I'm like, would I want a 19-year-old to be my son?
And he was goofy too, wasn't he?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if he's going to be listening to this, so I want to be careful what I say. No, I'm just joking. TJ and Jenny, they were the first people I saw a deeper, and it wasn't that there were these other people. It was just, they were the first people I noticed it in, with a deeper, more sincere seriousness. And I don't mean like, they were lighthearted, so I don't mean like overly serious. I just mean like they took their faith really seriously, and they invited other people into that in a way that was kind of challenging. So it was invitational of like, come be a part of our life. Like, let's go do a lot of fun stuff together. But like, by being in close proximity to us, we're going to challenge you. We want you to consider going on a mission trip. And when you're, obviously when you're old enough, and like, we want to teach you what it looks like to serve. And so I just think, there's no, my encouragement to youth pastors, I think, would be just don't forget how impactful those small things can be. And even though it might seem, like it's not a big deal, like teaching kids those things and really loving them and investing them. Like, I remember, the VSM boot camp, which I don't know if that's even still a thing, but the boot camp that used to exist to train all of the volunteer student missions, like our youth group would go to that, and we would always have, 3, 4, 5 kids going on a student mission trip. But our whole youth group basically would go and serve the whole week, just as like support. And, it's summertime, it's hot. You're not getting any sort of, compensation or anything like that. But those type things fueled a grassroots level hunger to see God glorified in the nations, because you were around other people. Some of the missionaries were there, just some of the people who were very on the ground, like living out the gospel and the Great Commission. You rubbed arms with them, and like there's just there's nothing like that. So that was massively formative. And then my parents and my my best friend's parents, Glenn and Kathy Sly, which they've been a part of Emmanuel for a long time. They've been most recently a part of Wyatt in El Dorado. But Jake was my best friend. We were in the band together. What was really amazing about, I think, both of our parents and our families, but I'll talk about Jake's family in particular, because we all have our parents who love us and stuff like that. But Jake's parents, in many ways, just saw little sparks of what God was doing, and they were like the kings and queens of throwing gasoline on the sparks. Oh, hey, you guys, you guys have a hunger for playing worship music in your church? I wonder if there's other youth groups around that we could go and like lead worship for. And so they would get with TJ, and we would call so-and-so, and we would drive down to Taylor, and we would lead worship and have an evening like hanging out with their youth group. And then we would drive over to Hope. I mean, we did that at your church. And
that's cool.
We would drive over, and then it got bigger, and it was like, hey, you guys need a trailer, but you don't have any money. So like, what if we buy you a trailer? It'll be in our name, but like you guys can use it to do this ministry that you want. Okay, that would be awesome. And suddenly we had our own trailer. Eventually, let us help you budget, because everything we were doing was for free for a long time. And then people started paying us small amounts of money to come do this stuff. And then it was like, well, hey, we'll help you budget this so that you can use it. So eventually we buy a sound system. And we've got a trailer and a sound system, and none of us, we're just these teenage kids. And I just tell that story because whether it's music or other, things that young people are getting into, it's like when I'm looking back on that as an adult, it was borderline wasteful because they knew we were going to, dent it up and bang it up and probably, dent their car at some point doing all of this. But they truly saw it as an investment into who we are, into the ministry we were doing. And I look back on it and I'm like, gosh, as an adult, that was just so sacrificial. Like it was financially sacrificial. It was sacrificial with their time and energy and effort. But what it did was it fanned into flame that small spark of what God was doing in our life. And I'm like, now I'm writing worship songs and I just look at the things I'm doing, like whether it's writing songs or, speaking at an event or whatever it is. And I'm like, all of that is downstream of these people early on in my life, fanning into flame a very immature, a very, base level gifting. But if you don't have that, would I have kept going? Maybe not. I mean, I might have dropped off, but if I would have, I might not be as far along as I am now. And I just think that's such a beautiful picture of discipleship, of not just, it goes so far beyond someone coming to follow Jesus. And it's like, how can I leverage anything that God's given me for the benefit of that person's gifting, that person's call on their life? And so, I could talk about a lot of people, many of them who were youth pastors then, who are senior pastors at a lot of our churches now. A lot of those, young guys had little kids like that age who are now, deacons in their church or, serving in different roles like that. And, I just think, man, to encourage those parents who are doing that in your youth groups, like to, cast that vision for them. Maybe if they can't see it, be the parent, be the people's house that all the kids are hanging out with for a discipleship opportunity, and it's going to get messy because we were all little kids. Like it's going to get messy. It might get expensive. Something probably will get broken along the way. But like in the grand scheme of things, man, if that fans into flame a true love for God and ministry, that's just worth a lot. Amen.
Man, that's good stuff right there. Well, hey, it's kind of hard to make a transition from such just a great portion of our conversation right there. But I'm wondering in all of that, because you seem to have always been interested in music. Am I right in that? You said your family was your dad's side of the family was musical, but were you only interested in music, or were there other interests in your life? Are you a sports guy? Were you an athlete? And maybe what would you say to a youth pastor who maybe has a hard time connecting with somebody who maybe doesn't have the same interests as theirs? What would you say in that vein?
TJ, my youth pastor, is a great example of that. Outside of music, we didn't share a lot of common interest. Fly fishing, he loves fly fishing, so he took me fly fishing. No, I was a total jock turned music nerd later in high school. My dad was a football coach growing up.
Oh, wow.
So I grew up, with like on the football fields, grass on my shoes every day, smelling like cut grass. Like he was the head football coach at Camden Fairview for 18 years, I think. So I grew up playing baseball and football and liked basically any sports. Music was a side thing. My dad's side of the family, my dad also plays guitar and sings. His side of the family has a lot of musicians in it. So we would get together at holidays and stuff like that and play music. Interestingly enough, I didn't really enjoy it that much until I had an outlet. That was the biggest thing for me. I didn't get a ton of gratification from just sitting in my bedroom playing guitar. But when I had an outlet that involved like actually using that gifting outside of my house, like going to my youth group, TJ would give me he would give me chord charts and a cup, back then, like literal CDs. And he would be like, this chord chart goes with this song on this CD, learn it by next week, So, it was really interesting. I mean, I this is hilarious that I think about it now. I would show up to Wednesday night in baseball uniform sometimes because I had just left baseball practice, and I would lead worship with like dirty baseball uniform on. There's nothing that says more small town youth group than that, So yeah, I was somewhere along the way, though, I began to understand the difference between hobbies and calling. That's where it shifted for me. I began to recognize I love sports. I'm not going to do sports for the rest of my life. And that was later in high school, but I balanced them both I was really into both. And then once I figured that out, like I was I think, I mean, you could ask some of my friends, I think I was a slightly above average athlete. Like I did pretty well. I could have played maybe like Division II football or something like that. But God was just shifting my desires where I loved football, but I wanted to give my life toward ministry, And for other people, in their other kids, like in your youth groups, that might be like toward the medical field or that. I mean, I don't have to say that like ministry is not just relegated to church staff positions, but I think it's more of, the zoom out effect again of like helping young people recognize, hey, you're probably good at a bunch of things, but like there are specific ways that God's wired you and gifted you that can really play into serving needs of people around you for the duration of your lifetime. So what if you thought about your occupation a little bit more like your future occupation, a little bit more like that? Because, I mean, let's be honest, lots of kids get out of high school and spend too many years trying to figure out what do I need to be doing, and there's in some ways kind of a low level theology of vocation that I think youth pastors can be instilling in students to recognize that it's not, it's that old paradigm. It's not just that I work so that I can have fun on the weekends, but my work can actually have purpose and I can glorify God through it, whether I'm a doctor, a musician, a teacher, etc. So that would be my encouragement to youth pastors is helping, like calling out those things in students. I remember people, Jenny and TJ and people in my church telling me, hey, I don't know if you recognize this, but you're gifted uniquely at these things. And I didn't recognize it until they said it. And then when they said it, I started to see it, so it's like maybe for someone in your youth group, they're just extremely like they meet the needs of others. They go beyond other people to serve. And it's like, that person might be an amazing nurse or doctor later in their life, but they might need someone to call out. They might not even recognize how gifted they are at that thing, but you're there specifically to call those things out, encourage them, tell them what they're good at, and maybe in love, tell a few of us what we're not good at that we think we're good at.
Yeah, man, that's so good. I think we need to all get better at affirming the gifts that we have, that the Lord has given us in that way. That's such a good word. Thanks, Aaron.
You bet.
Aaron, I love that idea of throwing gasoline on the spark. I've seen it work over the years, but man, just to think about the people in your life that did that and where you're at now, and not just now, but what God is going to do in the future. And how that you look back, so that big view, it's just fantastic stuff. And it kind of ties in with that. I want to say your second message, you were talking about living life sacrificially, giving your life in full worship, and so it was just, boy, I want to thank you publicly for your life and for your ministry. You've served as an example to a lot of kids, a lot of students over these past several years that saw you on that journey. And you kept your eyes on what God wanted. My son was one of those. And so I just want to thank you publicly for that.
That's cool.
It's a very powerful thing.
Thank you.
Well, Aaron, thank you so much for being on the podcast. If somebody wants to get a hold of you and find out more about Dwell Ministries or any of the other things that you're doing, what's the best way to do that?
That's a great question. I think social media, honestly, on Instagram, I'm on Facebook. You can find me on Instagram at Aaron W Music, and or you can find my email through any of those outlets as well. Would love to, if I can connect and help anyone along the journey, please let me know.
Well, finding that calling, understanding what you're good at, what God would have you do long term is one of the things that you can do at Central Baptist College. They're one of our sponsors with our podcast. And so if you have a student who's looking at that next stage of education, have them check out Central Baptist College in Conway. That's cbc.edu. And for those of you who are student ministry workers who are trying to finish the degree, they do have their PACE program. Again, you can find out information at cbc.edu. Again, thank you so much, Aaron, for sharing with us today. Thank you, listeners, for downloading. We want to be here for you. We want to connect with you, and we want to keep going because student ministry matters.
Thanks for listening to the Student Ministry Matters podcast. Get connected at studentministrymatters.com or follow us on Facebook and Instagram at Student Ministry Matters. Until next time, keep up the great work with your students because the work matters.